Hello and welcome to the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 65 of the Meet the Parents podcast and another half an hour of parenting chat. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and tonight I'm joined by John from Dad You Geek. Good evening, John.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. On the wind down now ahead of our summer holiday. For our last edition before we take our summer break, we're going to talk about some recent research that shows how widespread the threat of cyberbullying is among young people. Is our always-on social media world causing our kids to grow up in a culture of antagonism? Now, research from anti-bullying charity Ditch the Label suggests this may well be the case. So their survey covered over 10,000 people aged between 12 and 20 and presented some worrying findings for parents and others who have a duty of care for kids. Now, perhaps most worryingly, the survey suggests that cyberbullying is increasingly widespread. Nearly 70% of youngsters admitted to having abused someone else online, while 17% claim to have been bullied online themselves. So, John, any observations on those numbers?
Yeah, I think the 17% is low. Of those that claimed to have been bullied, I'd say that in reality that's probably a lot higher, and it doesn't surprise me actually, because as I think I put a tweet out when I saw this, what we were going to be discussing tonight, I was like, oh, this couldn't have been at a more opportune time actually, because social media has been a very hot topic for us in our house recently, and the overuse of it and having time away from the screen because of the complications that using social media causes within friendship groups now. So yeah, that really doesn't surprise me, and it is concerning. And what concerns me more is parents that are completely oblivious to social media and don't understand it. And I think I spoke about it before. The reason I started using social media and the blog really as Dad You Geek was the only way I'm going to be able to help my kids through using social media and technology is to keep up with it and be in front of them.
Yeah, and it is very easy to be dismissive of social media and the problems that it can cause if you don't understand it yourself, isn't it? And,
yep.
And you know, I admit, I did wonder. It did seem like a very large discrepancy or very large gap between that 70% who've admitted to being abusers and the 17% who admitted to having been abused. And yeah, I mean, much like you have, I guess you have to take particularly the latter number with a bit of a pinch of salt. You know, maybe there's more of a stigma to admitting that you've been bullied, which means that number is perhaps lower than reality. But it did seem to suggest to me that potentially we have a lot of situations where we have a relatively small number of kids who are being ganged up on by multiple others. And
potentially, yeah.
And I do wonder if it's maybe a case of bully or be bullied. You know, maybe some kids find safety in numbers and it's easier to side with the genuine bullies to reduce the chances of being bullied yourselves. And I guess that kind of situation to a certain extent has always been in existence in the school playground, but it's now expanded far beyond, you know, the confines of physical space because of social media.
I think it has, yeah. Yeah, and in the past in school, if somebody was being bullied in school, that would have happened at school, and it could have been dealt with at school and stopped at school. Now, what you find happens is it will start in school, escalate massively overnight because it continues, and then there's an even bigger fallout in school the next day.
Yeah, because potentially there's no escape, is there?
There is no escape. No, you couldn't come in and close the door and put it out of your mind.
Yeah, and the research suggested also that 1 in 3 young people say that they live in fear of cyberbullying, and the most likely cause of that bullying is appearance. Now, I guess there's nothing particularly new about that. You know, 'twas ever thus. But isn't that just sad? It's hard not to see this as a reflection of our modern society's obsession with perfection and the willingness of media and public alike to, things like fat shaming, airbrushing out of models' imperfections in photos, all that kind of stuff. And it's almost impossible to escape because it's all around us, isn't it?
It really is all around us. And we joked at the beginning about me giving up time because of Love Island. Love Island's a perfect example of something that doesn't represent society, because everyone in there is buffed and toned within an inch of their life.
A bit like you and me, obviously.
Of course. It's just like a normal bloggers conference, isn't it? Where you see everybody and they all just look so glamorous. And then there's the dad bloggers. No, I'm joking. Other dad bloggers. It was a joke. But yeah, it is becoming. I think the thing I'm happy about is more people are talking about it, and it's becoming unacceptable now to start fat shaming people or being abusive to people because of the way they look, the way they act, their beliefs. That's now. I think there's more people that get on the back of the people that are spreading this hate and being nasty online or even in face to face. But what still needs to be dealt with is people accepting who they are within their own skin and being comfortable with themselves. And I listened actually, and it's well worth a listen. Radio 1 did a surgery, the Radio 1 surgery that used to be on a Sunday night. It's no longer on a Sunday night. So that kids obviously don't sit in their room now and listen to Radio 1 on a Sunday night like I used to. But they recently done a thing on body image, and that was a really interesting program, and it just proves how difficult it can be really to be on social media as well. So I think you've got to have a certain look, and I always have the worst person in our family for this is Ashley. She's the oldest, and she'll hate me for saying this on here, so I apologise to her now. But when she does a selfie, she does this duck. I call it duck face. It's not a duck. She doesn't look anything like a duck. But she pouts those lips out, and I just go, "Oh, duck face." And yes, that's me shaming her, but it's her trying to make her lips look more fuller than they actually are, and it's not her natural smile that I know. But and I can only blame the Kardashians or somebody like that for continually making this look. And it's difficult. It really is difficult, and it's tough. I think it's tough being a youngster on social media now. When you get older and you become comfortable within your own skin, you really couldn't give a damn what other people think of you as much.
Yeah, I mean, there were times at school when I was called a fat kid, mostly because I was a fat kid. But I could take care of myself when people tried it onto my face, and I didn't ever have to worry about being hounded from a distance by, either schoolmates or even strangers via social media. Children being what they are, bullying can be pretty relentless and cruel. And we've all seen enough stories over the last few years of teenagers who've been driven to suicide, depression or self-harm to know the kind of damage that even relatively mild and supposedly playful bullying can cause to vulnerable kids.
Yeah, and that's the concern is you're going to have these vulnerable kids out there that don't have a support network or support family around them, and it's the impact it has on them. And somebody's sitting there telling them to put the phone away, step away from the screen, and kind of positive role models around them to point them and guide them in the right way and give them that self-belief.
Let me just change tack for a moment and talk about some Department of Education statistics that were published last week that showed that the number of pupils being excluded from schools on either a permanent or fixed term basis, or what in old money we used to call expulsions and suspensions, is on the rise. So for the academic year 2015-16, there were nearly 7,000 permanent exclusions from state-funded primary and secondary schools in England, of which over 1,500 were for physical assault against either a pupil or an adult, and nearly 1,000 more for verbal abuse or bullying. Now, the picture's similar for fixed-term exclusions, with nearly half of 340,000 suspensions being for physical or verbal abuse or bullying. Now, those numbers are pretty shocking, aren't they?
They really are, yeah. And being a governor that follows these quite closely for the school that I'm a governor at, I've not heard of any physical abuse personally in our school, although don't quote me on those facts. I don't want to do Diane Abbott and give you incorrect information. Yeah, that seems a massive number. It really is, and I can't answer for that. The only thing I know is certainly and this may actually skew the figures slightly, in the area I live, so I live in Harlow, there's an agreement between the schools in the area to do everything that they possibly can not to permanently exclude a pupil, whether that's transferring them from one school to another or having some kind of intervention. The last case is actually permanent exclusion. But yeah, that's actually quite. And I tried to look up some statistics just for Essex, for where I live, but it's quite hard to find that information.
Yeah. And I guess attitudes have probably changed quite a bit over the last generation, insofar that, as you say, permanent exclusion is now seen as an absolute last resort because of the damage that it can cause longer term to pupils, because it's really just shunting off the problem to somebody else, isn't it?
It is, and I know in our area we've got a specialist school, and I know you shouldn't call it that, but there is a school that's lower in numbers in terms of overall pupil numbers, and the staff to pupil number ratio is higher, and it's for those children that have got difficulties that have made school quite hard for them, and it can be various. It can be behavioural problems, but majority, to be honest, are behavioural problems, and they go to this school that has the interventions and support in place to deal with that. But I think they may also, that having those in certain areas may also be on the increase, because in the past schools have been able to call on resources and support from local authorities that probably aren't there anymore because of government cuts to education spending. So that's a concern, and that would be interesting to see if it's proven that that's one of the reasons that for these increases in assaults on staff is because they're not got the funding there that they need in schools.
Yeah, and it's certainly a worrying trend, because the number of both expulsions and suspensions has risen in each of the past 3 years. The number of permanent exclusions has risen by 44% over that period, and that's quite a worrying trend. And as you say, you have to worry whether a lack of resources, whether that's lack of teachers or just lack of funding, has an impact in terms of the system's ability to deal with such cases.
Because you have to wonder, what if there's been an increase in 44% of children, what is happening to these children that have actually been permanently excluded?
Yeah, because they have to go somewhere.
They're going to have to go somewhere. So it'd just be shifted onto another school, hopefully in the same area, that's then going to have to deal with that. And that will only escalate. And I think stats prove that if children aren't in school in an education, then they're up to no good. They're going to be doing something else, and they're going to be to fill their time. And 9 times out of 10, it's probably not brilliant.
The other thing that really surprised me was digging into the detail behind the numbers of the 1,500 permanent exclusions. Pretty much exactly a third were from primary schools, and overall, nearly half the expulsions for physical assaults were for attacks on adults rather than kids. So, there's plenty of troublesome incidents happening before kids even reach secondary school, and teachers are just as much at risk as pupils when it comes to physical abuse. And there isn't always necessarily the backup and support system for dealing with that kind of abuse or assault.
Yeah, well, teachers are trained in how to restrain kids now, which I'm pretty sure that never used to happen when I was at school. So teachers have to go through training in how to safely restrain a child that's being physically abusive.
Yeah, I guess for their own safety and to avoid any.
It's for the pupil safety as well, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it avoids any kind of legal or disciplinary comebacks as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's quite a scary thought, and I don't know why there's a high proportion of those in primary schools. That's quite a worrying stat.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess there could be any number of reasons behind that. I guess primary school kids are less emotionally developed, but I wouldn't want to hypothesize or speculate too much about some of the reasons behind that. But the fact there are such a large number of cases happening in primary schools, and as you say, permanent exclusion being a last resort, I mean, that's really quite worrying. So returning back to the ditch the label research and our obsession with perfection and curating our personal lives, there was almost half of the people surveyed said that they wouldn't discuss bad things in their lives on social media, and many admitted they presented an edited version of their lives. Now, as bloggers, we're familiar with the quest for the perfect image, and we all know of people, both bloggers and non-bloggers, who carefully curate their lives online. Facebook isn't also referred to as boast book or brag book for nothing, and the expression humble brag has entered the common vernacular as something that most often manifests itself on social media. So, is this, in addition to the whole issue of cyberbullying, something that you worry about with the girls, and have you spoken to them about it much?
Spoken greatly, in depth, really, about it, about cyberbullying and the whole pressures of social media. I'll admit I'm one of the 47% that kind of has a rose-tinted look on my social media life, should I say? Because I don't think, from memory, and I'd have to check some of the blog posts, I've actually wrote anything about any struggles we've gone through as a family or anything serious like that. I say serious. We spoke about death on the blog, because that's quite a hard subject. But when things are going bad, or I don't think I've ever gone into depth about that, or I'm not one to actually post negative things on Facebook or saying I'm having a crap day. I'll probably save that for Twitter, if I'm honest. But talking to the kids it's key, certainly more so with Katie than Ashley. It's actually quite different. It's quite different in how we've had to deal with the teenage years for the both of them. Because when Ashley was a teen, social media wasn't really a big issue for her. Certainly in early teens, it was still in its infancy, and I've been on Twitter for 10 years now, which is quite scary. But Ashley still very rarely uses Twitter. But for Katie, it's more at the moment. She's got very controlled usage of Facebook. She doesn't have Twitter, or not an account that she has control of. And she has Instagram, and to be honest, that's the one that gives the biggest issues. Instagram, she has to have time away from that. She knows that if she's having problems on that, she can come and speak to us, and how to report when she's having issues. That's the main thing, because it's a massive concern for me about the impact it has on her. Certainly, it's more on her. It's all about her mental health.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mention Instagram, because the research suggests that is the social platform that's used most for for mean comments or cyberbullying or whatever. And 7% of users said that they'd been bullied on it, compared with 6% for Facebook, 5% for Snapchat, and 2% for both Twitter and YouTube. And I rather suspect that, similar to the 17% number we were talking about earlier, that number is probably underrepresentative of the number who have actually been bullied on social media. And linked to those figures, 40% of 12 to 20-year-olds said they felt bad if nobody liked their selfies, and 35% said their confidence was directly linked to the number of followers they had. Now, obviously, for bloggers, both those figures would be 100%, but isn't it just sad that self-esteem is so closely linked to what, at the end of the day, are numbers on social media?
It is, and it does concern you. It does, well, I don't know, concern you. It concerns me about what kind of expectations we're putting on children, certainly to have these numbers, etc. And funnily enough, I was speaking to Katie about this only the other day, around if a post of hers doesn't get enough likes, or if she gets some comments, what does she do? So comments, she just ignores or deletes them, and not enough likes, she's not worried if a photo, any picture she puts on her Instagram is because it's a picture she likes. So I was really pleased when she said that, because it means she's using Instagram for the right reasons and putting a picture out there because it's one that she actually genuinely likes and wants to share. On the flip side of that, you know when there is issues on social media with her, because there is a change in behaviour, and when something's happened. It's difficult, because I want her to use these things, because I think they are really good tools, not just for keeping in touch with friends, but I think they're good to build and find networks when she gets older of creative things and areas that she likes, and find like-minded people, like the blogging community's grown as a result of social media. It's really difficult, and it's one you have to continually be talking to your children about. And I don't need to tell parents to suck eggs, but it's something you have to keep on top of.
Yeah, and definitely. And, as bloggers, we are probably much more aware of and sensitive to the impact that social media can have on both ourselves and our kids. And yeah, as you've described with Ashley, it can be quite worrying how profound an impact social media can have on a person. And I mean, my teenage goddaughter has often said that she has to delete any Instagram post that hasn't received at least 10 likes within half an hour of posting. Now, she is joking, but she's only half joking.
Yeah, I kind of get that though.
And and there is a lot of peer pressure amongst teens to be able to present because it is you are opening yourself up to a certain extent, aren't you, and saying here's my life, look at me, like me.
Well, you're putting it out there, aren't you? Yeah, and it's kind of like the way to view it is it's an online diary, and it's you putting a part of you out there for everyone to critique on. Rightly or wrongly, that's not what they're doing, but that's the potential it could have. Is somebody will critique what you've put up there, and there can be fallout from that.
In many ways, it's similar to what we do as bloggers when we put our words out there. But I guess with something like Instagram or Facebook to a lesser extent, the response is much more immediate. So if you don't get your 10 likes within half an hour or whatever it does, it has a much more immediate and I guess visceral impact than posting a blog post that only receives 10 views. Or
perhaps you need to teach them what exactly right times to post their Instagram photos. You're right, and that's why I was pleased when Katie said that she puts pictures up on her Instagram because it's one she likes. Although she did recently, and I can't remember when it was, she did go through and delete a load of pictures off Instagram, and I never actually got to the bottom of why. It was kind of resetting her whole page.
Yeah, and I think that's becoming increasingly common now. It is almost like some people feel the need to almost reinvent themselves on a regular basis and wipe the slate clean. And, that can be for, I guess, a variety of healthy reasons as well as unhealthy reasons. But these are difficult things to judge. And as parents, I guess we have a certain amount of responsibility to at least be aware of and sensitive to some of these issues that may crop up from time to time.
Makes you wonder, should Instagram just start deleting posts after a while? So I've got 2,900 photos on my Instagram. Who's ever going to go back to the beginning of that? It would take your thumb would be really cramped by the time you got to the bottom.
We've been talking about cyberbullying in the context of kids primarily here, but it's not just restricted to children, is it? There's plenty of it that happens between supposed grown-ups as well. I mean, you just look at the kind of treatment that was dished out to anyone who dared to admit on social media that they voted Tory in the last election, or by both the pro-Trump and the anti-Trump factions, and or by the "I'm so right, you must be an idiot" school of debating, or by anyone subscribing to any of the 50 shades of bigotry that rarely seem to lurk far from the surface of Twitter. Or by slightly deranged semi-stalkery types who try to pass themselves off as other people to spout bile at others, or even issue death threats against the subject of their supposed affections for daring to voice their opinions. It's almost like we've lost the ability to have an argument or to have a difference of opinion with someone without turning it into a slanging match, isn't it?
What happened to healthy debate?
Yeah, and we do seem to be losing the art of that now on social media.
We certainly do. It's everyone else is wrong if I'm right, and that's the view that everyone seems to take, which is bonkers. And I'm all for having people with different opinions and views, because that's what democracy is at the end of the day, isn't it? And if you don't want to go down the route of not having that open and free speech, but people just need to be sensible, and just because somebody's got opposing views to you, as long as they're within reason, fair to have those views, then so be it. I know plenty of people who voted Tory. It's not their fault. I'm joking. Yeah, God, you need other people to you need opposing views. Otherwise, if everyone thought the same, it would be boring. But if you're going to have that healthy debate, have some respect for somebody else, please. Please, please, please.
Yeah, and I see it time and again on social media, and it reminds me of the old expression that compromise is getting you to agree with me.
Yeah, it's very true. But the growing thing I'm seeing as well, more and more, certainly with bloggers, is kind of sub accounts opening up, which are trying to pretend to be that blogger, and then trying to smear crap about them all over the internet. And you're just thinking, what is going on?
It is slightly crazy, isn't it? And you and I can certainly name one or two individuals who have been the unfortunate target of attacks like this, and you have to wonder why. But anyway, I guess it is what it is, and for all the good and all the fun that exists on social media, and we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that 99% of people on social media are fundamentally decent people. There are some real crazies out there who seem to think that the anonymity of an online profile gives them the divine right to behave however they like and to hide behind their right to freedom of speech to be really quite abusive and nasty. And sadly, some people seem to forget that just because you have the right to a voice doesn't mean you're entitled to shove it down other people's throats.
No, exactly.
And on that note, John, I'll have no more jokes from you about my ever-expanding waistline, or you'll be receiving a visit from some very unpleasant gentlemen with baseball bats. Got it? And that's it for this episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back in September, on either the 8th or the 15th, depending on how long it takes me to recover from our driving holiday across Europe. But in the meantime, here's where you can find the two of us online. John? dadyougeek.co.uk for the blog, and then dadyougeek on all of your good social media platforms. And you can find me at slouchingtowardsthatcham.com and across social media at thatchamdad. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. You can also follow us on Twitter at Parents Podcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. Finally, if you're on iTunes, please do spare us a couple of minutes to visit the Meet the Parents Podcast page and give us a rating and review. It makes a big difference to our visibility in the podcast rankings, and it helps us to share the podcast love to new audiences. Go on, you know you want to. Anyway, thanks for listening, and do please join us again in September when we return from our summer holidays, ready and raring to go for another academic year. Good night.